You're listening to the Empowered to Heal podcast. I'm your host, Dina T, and I'm so excited to take you on a journey through stories of everyday experts as we share the ways we've harnessed the power inside us to improve the quality of our lives and the health of our minds. We're so excited to have you here with us and hope you feel inspired and empowered to heal. Hello, you beautiful souls. Lately, I have found myself feeling a bit discouraged, especially when I'm on social media. I belong to some Facebook groups that make it apparent that when someone is diagnosed with a mental illness, that it often becomes that person's identity in a super crappy way. You see, everything can seem to become blamed on the diagnosis. And all emotions or behaviors can feel like they're under a microscope. I struggle with this because it just doesn't seem fair to reduce someone and their emotions or their behaviors or just their functioning to a singular thing like a diagnosis. Perhaps the hardest part about this for me is that if it were a diagnosis like resilient or empowered, strong, brave, then freaking A, like that's awesome. Go you. Those are all things that are empowering. And when we think of those types of words or definitions or identities for ourselves, it increases the health of our mind. It brings us a sense of empowerment. But when it's a diagnosis that has a stigma attached to it, your entire being can be reduced to an illness. And people can start seeing you through a diagnostic or like a punitive lens. And I feel like this is especially true when people become diagnosed with a subclass of mental health diagnoses called personality disorders. Now, when those who are not well informed about personality disorders hear about them, they often visualize some horrific scene or role played in a movie. Personality disorders are not like how they are portrayed in movies. Just like most things, movies oftentimes scale things to the nth degree. They exaggerate on things. Throughout my time working in the mental health field and studying mental health, I've always veered away from clinical jargon that's marginalizing or that uses language that has negative connotations tied to it because I fear that the stigma takes away from the human being having those experiences. I strongly believe that how we talk about something impacts how we view, how we feel, and how we experience something. And that's why I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest. I got giddy when I reached out to an old friend of mine who had recently disclosed on Facebook that they were diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, which is commonly referred to in the public as multiple personality disorder. And I got giddy when I reached out to her and asked her to join the podcast to talk about her experiences with DID. DID stands for Dissociative Identity Disorder. And she said yes. And it made me so excited because I think it's beautiful to have real world opportunities to expose people to the realities of what these diagnoses can look like, how they're created, and how we heal through them and try and squash the stigma that's present around them. And this friend of mine, her name's Valentine. We go way back to high school years. Since receiving this diagnosis, she has decided to create a YouTube channel, which she's currently in the process of building, that is going to be a place to provide education and light around dissociative identity disorder and to help squash stigma. So when I think of DID, I've always thought about it being more of like a subconscious coping tool. So it's in my mind, I classify it as being a product of like an extreme prolonged trauma that in order for your mind to protect you, your mind creates safety in that moment by closing you out from having to experience it and creating a different part of you that can. So this is designed to protect you from having to consciously tolerate the trauma that you went through. And once your brain does this, there's no real going back. So if your brain stops and you completely black out and don't have to experience all the traumatic moments you've been through, you don't have to relive them, but a different part of your brain can take over and experience that for you. How your brain has sectioned itself off, and I'm using the word sectioned itself off to help easily describe this to everybody, but how your brain has helped section itself off is not something that you can like flip a switch and undo. It is now a coping tool of your brain. And so this is how I've always kind of understood dissociative identity disorder. I see it really as a safety mechanism, right? It's a safety mechanism that becomes a part of who you are, and it's a part of who you are thereafter. And it's present when biologically and psychologically needed in order to survive. And sometimes it can be difficult to manage the different presenting personalities that are coming forth in your life and honor them and navigate life when you have moments where you may black out or not experience a moment in your life, but another part of you did. So I know this is all very difficult to conceptualize, but it's a real thing, and it's a pretty intensive way to protect our brains after going through significant prolonged trauma. And today's guest, Channing Valentine, she has recently been diagnosed with this. And so she's coming on to share a little bit about what this experience is like. And to be very clear, DID is not Channing's personality, right? It is a diagnosis that she's recently been diagnosed with. Channing Valentine is a writer for whatculture.com, and she has experience with professional screenwriting. And since her teens, she's been an advocate for the LGBTQ rights as a bisexual woman herself. And she's been a survivor of conversion therapy. Channing's adult life, she has been diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder, and most recently, dissociative identity disorder. And her mission is to dispel stigmas surrounding mental illness and address their negative portrayal in popular media. She's got an upcoming YouTube series that she is using to spread light around dissociative identity disorder, how she copes with daily life, and the evolution of this disorder as more is discovered about this curious illness. And you guys can find her on YouTube under Miss Valentine DID. So let's give Channing Valentine a warm welcome to the Empower to Heal podcast. Hi there, Channing. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be here.
It's an honor to get to have you on here today. You're somebody that I've known for years on the sidelines,
I
and
know.
more recently, I've come to admire your strength and your vulnerability and how you share with the world who you truly are with no apologies. You just go straight for it. And you've been somebody who's embodied the sense of a warrior to me for a very long time. I say that because for as long as I've known you, you've presented strong and you've presented caring and you've presented aware. And that's all been despite or in the face of hardship. And so I'm so excited just to get to have a moment to pick your brain and learn about your beautiful warrior within you.
Oh, thank you. That was the sweetest thing I think I've heard in a long time. Thank you.
Of course. So you're here today to share with us a little bit about living life with mental health diagnoses. And I know you shared with me personally that you have, and you've shared with the world too through social media, that you've been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. And I'd love to learn from you what that means for you in your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I was only diagnosed in, the middle of the year last year. So it's still new for me, but I've
Hmm.
done my own research. I've found my own support groups. I've been lucky enough to have three medical professionals all agree that I have this disorder, which is already rare in and itself because it's such an uncommon disorder
Mm-hmm.
and illness that people suffer with, and there's still some debate within some mental health communities about its validation and things like that. Unfortunately,
Mm.
there's a little bit of
Yeah.
self-doubt that kind of plays into being diagnosed with this disorder too. So it's a lot
Mm.
about, for me, it's been a lot about learning about it, applying it to myself, and seeing if the pieces fit together for myself, and kind of dispelling all
Mm.
the media portrayal of it, and the stigma that it has in society and things of that nature, and just kind of
Yes.
coming from an unbiased perspective and learning about my brain and how it works in a different way.
Yes. And dissociative identity disorder was formerly known as multiple personality disorder and commonly referred to as that still to this day, even though there's been some development around the understanding of it that it's not about developing multiple personalities, but it's about experiencing a some prolonged trauma in the early years of life that forces your brain to cope through disassociating and finding alternative means to exist to persevere through that trauma. That's my understanding of it through the mental health field of work that I do. What has it meant to you to be diagnosed with this? What does dissociative identity disorder look like for you?
Well, honestly, the best way that myself and other members of the DID community have been able to explain it to others is the movie Inside Out.
Okay.
um, it seems like it's a perfect example of what DID looks like, and um, an example is every person with DID has what they call a system. And that just means how all of their parts or alters work together. And they all have an inner
Mm.
world, and everyone's inner world looks different. So,
Mhm.
since we're, speaking about me personally, for whatever reason, maybe it's because it was like my first huge obsession as a kid, but my inner world looks like the inside of the Millennium Falcon. And people, my parts or alters will take turns kind of jumping into the cockpit, either with me, next
Right.
to me, instead of me, whoever, whatever it needs to. So if you kind of imagine that movie Inside Out with, the different variants of, extreme sadness, extreme, anger, extreme joy, like these extreme emotions, it's very similar to how a lot of people with
Mm.
DID um, operate, in the sense that, we all have, if we have huge emotional triggers that are overwhelming for us to take on,
Mm.
somebody else will usually step forward and take that on for us. Um, so,
It's like a protective factor.
yeah, absolutely. That ultimately, even the alters that aren't so
Mhm.
great, which I'm more than happy to talk about because I have some of those, there to protect you. They came at a time, they developed out of a time of something traumatic happening, or something that was overwhelming for your brain, or something that you couldn't process yourself, or just some form of trauma. And so ultimately they are there to take on that pain and take on that hurt and take on that burden for you,
Mm.
despite their different natures and things like that. At their core, they really are all protectors, even though some alters might have that role assigned to them, as the protector or the oppressor or things like that. Alters have different roles sometimes, but
Mm.
ultimately they are all there to protect
Yeah.
people like myself uh, from the pain and the trauma.
And that's how they
And
were developed, right? So,
exactly.
can you share with us a little bit about what you believe triggered your mind to need to disassociate in the first place?
It's hard for me to remember super far back, but from what I can gather is, I believe my first instance of disassociating was, I was sexually molested at a very young age, and that, I think, is when it kind of started for me.
Mm.
And then it just kind of became my way of coping
Mm.
from that moment forward. So it was just like more and more alters or personalities would appear because anytime I had any form of trauma, a new one would kind of show up and or someone else would take the place of another one or
Mm.
something to that effect.
Yeah. And you're using the word alters, and just to ensure people understand what we're talking about, alter is another personality or persona coming out of you and existing for a moment in time.
Correct. Yes. That is a good way of putting it. I used to believe that they were, again, I'm going to use the movie Inside Out as an example, but
Yeah.
I thought that they were like representations of my emotions rather than separate entities themselves.
Hmm.
Over time, as this kind of developed for me, I started to realize, it wasn't within my control, and people
Mm.
would take over when I didn't want them to, or the wrong person would take over when I was like, hey, this is too much for me. Can somebody else take over?
Mm.
Wasn't always a positive influence. I just started to realize that it was more than just strong emotions coming through. It was something else.
Yeah. And you just said, or you explained that you kind of interacted with your alters,
Oh,
asking them to step in moments of stress or overwhelm or trauma. What is that like?
yeah, I mean, I know I kind of say these things so casually just because it's just how it's just how I've always been, even when I
Yeah.
was a kid, my cousin used to make fun of me because I'd go around and say, "Oh, there are wars going on in my head." And he,
Mm.
he was just being a dumb boy and making fun of me, but that's his job. But and I didn't understand what was happening. I just heard voices yelling in my head. So eventually, instead of trying to like quiet them or play music over them or something, I just learned to like be copacetic with them. And
Mm.
it's like I keep making references to things, but that's the I mean, you'll realize that that's kind of my whole deal. But
Yes.
it's like playing The Sims where you suddenly pop yourself into this world and you're like, "Hey, I'm here now." And
Mm.
so it's like when I'm talking to them, I just visualize my inner world. And I'm not doing this consciously, it's just what happens. So
Mhm.
I'll be visualizing my inner world and kind of looking around the room, seeing who's there. Because, I have so
Mhm.
many that they kind of just roam around, and whoever is there when I
Mm.
need them to be or when I don't need them to be, or,
Mm.
sometimes someone negative will want to be in power, and I'll kind of direct my protector, be like, hey, don't let them get into the cockpit. Don't let them, come in here.
Mm.
Don't let them take over. So I just kind of imagine myself directing them or like kind of looking at them like because I all of my alters are fictive, so that means that they're also also fictional characters that exist in the real world.
Mm.
I just picture they're just how I imagine my alters are. So
That makes so much sense just knowing you
yeah,
and knowing your
right.
passions.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, they no wonder they all take residence in my head. So, and especially I think being a writer and creating worlds and things of that nature, I think it just came
Mhm.
naturally to me. Like writing was always a coping mechanism ever since I was a child, also. So, creating a world, escaping into a world, that's always been how I've dealt with things
Mm.
and survived, really.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. How did you guys, like you and your prescribers or your psychiatrists, clinicians, whoever you're working with, how did you identify the difference between hallucinating and like auditory hallucinations and dissociative identity disorder?
I think it was my therapist, the last therapist I had before the specialist I'm seeing now. The more I kind of was speaking about what was disturbing me, um, the more she said, this is kind of what this sounds like. It sounds like DID. So then I would talk to my psychiatrist about it. She gave me an evaluation. I had to go in, have some tests done. So it was really kind of like surprisingly quick process for Like,
Mm.
for my therapist at least, who was just like, I have a hunch about this and I think you need to get it checked out. And then, just
Yeah.
having that be, oh, that, and then having it just, the more I learned, the more it fit for me and the more it made sense and the more it was like, oh yeah, that's what my brain does,
Mm.
so, and,
Mhm.
it was the first time where I felt like, you know, reading about it really was something that I felt fit me, and, um, it
Mm.
just was like, yeah, that's what my brain does. That's how my brain like, and I would just assume that's how everyone's brain worked up until that point.
Yeah, because it's your normal.
Right. And so it was just, even though I'm,
Mhm.
years old, um, uh, I, I still am kind of astounded that I'm learning something new about my fully developed brain at this
Mhm.
point in my life, and just like, oh wait, everybody doesn't do that. What do you mean you all don't have 15 people
Yeah.
yelling at you in your head at once when something bad happens? What? Like,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And Channing, how many altars do you have or that you know you have?
last I counted, I had 16.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you keep track of them or is it just like you interact with them however it happens? Have you figured out a system to try and organize and understand your mind?
I mean, I've kind of just, since I've always kind of had this in my brain, it's less that there's a system and more that there's just some that are always around and always prevalent. And then some that kind of,
Mm.
lurk in the shadows, or, appear out of nowhere when I haven't seen them for a while, or, it's just, it kind of just depends on the situation and what it calls for. And sometimes I can try my best to call on ones that I think will be positive and productive, and sometimes I don't get that choice.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's less that I'm keeping track of them or keeping tabs on them. I know who the dangers are, and who the positive ones are, and who the negative ones are, and what that looks like.
Yeah. And let's talk about that for a minute because essentially your brain has created these alters or they have come out from a place of needing to protect you and supporting you through very traumatic times, taking the blow or the hit for
Right.
you, right? And what is that? So it's hard for my brain to think through having protectors that maybe are more negative than positive. Can you tell us about those protectors that you're like, ooh, you try to shy away from, or
Yeah.
what does that look like for you?
Well, there was one in particular. I just call her the Countess. She
Mhm.
is the bad one. I love her.
Uh-huh.
I love her, but she has very negative feelings towards a previous romantic relationship that I was in, and has
Mm.
very strong negative feelings towards that person. And her way of protecting me is by wanting to do harm to that person. So it's
Mm.
something that, like, I've had to work through, because it's like, obviously I don't want that to happen, because I do not want to harm anybody, and I am the body
Mhm.
that she inhabits, so I ultimately would be responsible for
Mhm.
that. So, there's things that I
Mhm.
have to do to kind of soothe her or appease her. It can be it's I just have to acknowledge her presence, and I have to, she kind of invited someone else into the party, and, ever since she's gotten this little friend, I think it's been, they've bonded and kind of ganged up on me a little bit. But,
Oh.
they're together, and they identify with one another.
Mm.
So it's like they have each other. Sounds weird because it's all me, but not. But it's so,
Yeah.
I just, it can even be something as simple as, like, one time I was, shopping for an anniversary present in a local store in Burbank, and we were the only people in there. I saw a necklace, and I just kind of heard her in the back of my mind go like, "Oh, I really like that." So I was like, "Okay, if you promise to be good, I'll buy you the necklace." It's like, it's like,
Mm.
negotiating with a toddler, like, "I'll give you a piece of candy if you just are quiet for a second."
Yeah.
So it's like, I've just kind of learned ways of avoiding things that upset her, and, trying to just acknowledge her without kind of suppressing her, because I know she thinks what she's doing or wants to do would be helpful,
Mhm.
and thinks it would be good for me, or that it would do me it would do some good, but really
Yeah.
it wouldn't. So it's just,
Yeah.
having to kind of have that argument with yourself. It's not really like with yourself though. It seems like the best way I can put it is like it's as if you're watching yourself on a movie screen. It's what I imagine like famous actors when they're watching a film that they're in experience. Like it's just when this is happening, I am
Mm.
completely like in the physical world, as I like to say it, is I'm completely blank. I am not here. I am not present. I am completely quiet and dead silent and I physically lose the ability to speak because I'm
Do you know what's going on though? It's like you're mute, but you can like see it happening or
so I like in my brain, I can see it all happening very well. It's just like watching a movie that's playing in my head that I have, no control over, but I'm still kind of talking to this other person, um, and this
yeah.
other side of myself, really. And then there's other times where, I'll something will trigger them, and it'll be like I'll notice after the fact. And
Mm.
like the worst. I don't want to say the worst experience because it was lucky that it was my protector, but something was really overwhelming me. And I apparently, the last thing I remember was I was outside, and then all of a sudden I was inside my bathroom in different clothes. Like no time had
Mm.
passed in my
Wow.
brain, but like it was like 1 second from the next, and I just started screaming because I was so freaked out. And then my partner was like, "Oh, you came back inside. You didn't. You weren't you. You complained that your clothes were uncomfortable." And you were talking about yourself in the third person, saying like, "Oh, it's okay, just leave her alone, she'll be fine." And I'm like, I don't remember doing that. Like I
That's so scary.
yeah, it is. So that hasn't happened too often, that I switch around to other people and that my alters interact with other people. It's happened on occasion,
Mm.
but not very often. More often than not, it's me just kind of interacting with them silently because I don't want them to come out. I don't want them to take over. So I'll fight them as much as I can. And sometimes I just, my brain isn't strong enough to, isn't
Yeah.
strong enough to fight them. So they just kind of take over. And I just kind of have to be along for the ride.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say your brain's not strong enough. I think your brain is trying to do what it had to do to survive. And now, even though you're not in these situations of needing to disassociate to survive all the time, that's a programmed part of your
Yeah.
brain, right? Like that's a muscle that's been built and a connection that's been built within your brain to
Right.
live and how your brain thinks it's supposed to live. And so I think it's phenomenal that you're able to even
Yeah.
bargain with your alters in order
Sometimes.
to maintain a sense of control. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes we're able to negotiate, and other times I'm not so lucky. It just
Yeah.
depends on who it is, depends on how angry they are, depends on
Mm.
how strong their presence is on my mind. You
Mhm.
know, because there's some that I
Mhm.
haven't seen for a really long time, but I know they're there, but it's just that they're just kind of like, "I'm cool." Like, I'm just kinda hanging out
Yeah.
until you need me. It's like, "All right. Talk to you later, I guess."
Yeah.
So, it's just it's an interesting experience, but I do know that they're all kind of there for my comfort in a way also. So, I think that
Mhm.
was something that I really struggled with in the beginning because I felt like, there's a couple of them that I just felt were my enemy and not my friend, and doing things that would hurt me or hurt other people, or that they wanted to anyway. And the more I realized, no, they're doing this out of protection and love for you, then it became a little bit more of a symbiotic relationship rather than, constantly being at odds with each other.
Mm. That is beautiful and so
Oh,
wise, Channing. The ability to recognize the purpose in something that can feel terrifying, feel completely out of your control, and can feel like it can literally take over your life and live your body. Like to find a place within you to honor its purpose and its intention and find a piece of you that can be at peace with that, I think is powerful for your mind, right? We don't heal when we're in turmoil. And your ability to create a dynamic within your mind to foster healing and see the different aspects of your mind in that way is very, very wise.
Oh, thank you. It's definitely been a process, and it hasn't happened overnight.
Mhm.
Sometimes I do still struggle with it because this is all so new for me, and I'm still learning a lot about my own mind and how it works, and how this manifests itself. There's still trauma that I need to process fully, I think, to
Mhm.
also help with that. And
Yeah.
because there's a lot of trauma that it's hard for me to still address and come to terms with because it was something I repressed for so long. And
Mm.
to have that kind of resurface in a weird time is,
Yeah.
it just, yeah, it just kind of added another layer onto things. So it was my way of healing, like
Yeah.
my need of for my need to heal essentially was born out of not only having cancer diagnosis where I needed to heal my body, but it was I need to heal all of me, because if I don't, then I'm not going to get through this. It
Mhm.
literally was a fighting for my life in every sense. It's either crumble mentally under the pressure that this illness, can bring into your life, and just feeling the weight of it on you and having it crush you down like waves hitting you every single time you try to get up, or you can try to overcome those hurdles in your mind and say at 7 when your alarm goes off and you know that you're going into a place that's going to make you feel like garbage. It's really hard to get up and do that every single day if you don't have a positive mentality, or if you don't have some sort of something
Yes.
to hold on to in your life that's positive. And I just needed to kind of find the positivity in all of this, because I felt like if I didn't, then it would just I wasn't going to make it. Like I had to. It
Mhm.
was literally a survival mechanism of I have to get my brain in check in order to save the rest of me.
And that awareness that you're describing is astronomical. So you just shared your cancer
Yeah.
diagnosis. So you have pancreatic cancer.
Yes.
You have gone through
Yes.
chemo for it. You've had surgery. You're currently in radiation and you're on the winning
Yes.
end of
Yes.
living.
Yes, I am.
And that's happening at the same time that you are learning and understanding this mental health diagnoses that you've been diagnosed with, and you're coming to terms and understanding how your brain works, and you've made the conscious decision to shift your thoughts to be positive and loving and affirming and kind and curious rather than at fight or at odds with something. And the what I think is so cool about this is it's commonly known that thoughts become reality, right? What
Absolutely.
we think and what we are perseverating on or constantly in our heads about becomes the reality that we live.
Absolutely.
And you shifted your reality. You shifted your reality into a place of understanding and curiosity and finding ways to feel in control of your body while you are literally like choosing life every day despite immense amounts of physical and emotional pain.
Well, yeah, I think that that's a really nice way of putting it, is choosing life, because that is what it is. Especially for me when I got that diagnosis, and I apologize for jumping the gun on that. I just bring it up so
No,
casually.
you're not. No, you're fine.
But once I did get that cancer diagnosis and hearing those words, you have cancer, is just, yeah, the my entire world did shift that day. And so when it
Mm.
did, I had to find a new way of living. And that wasn't necessarily like, oh, I have to change everything about myself or change my appearance or where I'm living or move or whatever. It was just more about I have to change my mental state. I have to change how I see things. I have to change
Yes.
how I see myself. I have to change how I see the world, and I have to change how I see my loved ones and what's important to me. Really make an effort to make, what's important to me a priority,
Mm.
because I have so often been, as many people do, put myself on the back burner and put other people ahead of myself and put others people's needs in front of my own. And that's I'm not saying that as like me being a superhero or anything. It's just having a hero complex. It's more of just
No.
there's so many people that struggle with their own mental illness and their own trauma that they don't want to deal with it. So instead of them dealing with it, they just put everybody else in front of them so that they don't have to deal with their own issues.
Yeah, it's a coping mechanism, right?
Absolutely. So I think that I was doing that so much. And then, this diagnosis really forced me to choose myself.
Mm.
That was something I had to learn how to do because I hadn't been taught to choose myself. Through the different traumas that I've gone through, all of them are saying the opposite, that, they all taught me something else. And so I had to simultaneously overcome a bunch of trauma just to understand that it was not only okay for me to choose myself, but that it was encouraged by the people who loved me and supported me, that they wanted me to choose myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was quite an experience because it changed.
Yeah, it's like an awakening moment in life,
It so
right?
was, and it changed so much for me in all positive ways, strangely enough. But I think just being able to kind of have that ability to recognize what needed to be done in the first place
Mhm.
is the first step, and the hardest one is acknowledging I have to change something.
Yes. Yeah, so often when we're under immense amount of stress, the last thing we can think about is ourselves changing. We want everything around us to get easier or be different or point the finger elsewhere and to look in a mirror and say, what can I control and how do I change what I feel like I need to within myself rather than fixating on the things I can't
Yes.
control? Like that's a huge step in
Oh,
healing as well.
absolutely. I cannot stress that enough because I often found myself, especially in my earlier years, I found myself often thinking and having that kind of mentality of just, backwards kind of thinking, of not thinking so positively and kind of thinking that the universe was out to get me or I was being punished for being
Mm,
happy and things like that. And it's not the
mm,
case. And I think that,
yes.
I struggled with that a lot, just having the I don't want to say wrong mentality, but just not being as aware about what was really good for me and what would really help me in the long run, as opposed to, just what's going to help me from this second to the next second.
Yeah. What do you think made that difference for you? What was that turning point in being able to move from kind of a disgruntled state around all the things you can't change to more of an awakened state around, oh, like I can control me and I'm going to focus on this instead? What in your life helped create that pivot?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it has to do with my fiance, and just because he is so the opposite of me in the sense that he's always relaxed. He never lets stress get to him. Even if he is stressed, like him really, really stressed is me mildly irritated. Like he, like he has this mentality of like, hey, like this is what it is and there's nothing I can do about it. So why am I gonna like why worry about it? Just that
Mm,
like and
wow.
just kind of having that influence of him around me and having that kind of energy around me where, oh, you can't control this. So you have to let it go. I just think I kind of took his example and was like, how do you do that? It seems like a superpower to me right now. Like, how, I really teach me your ways. Really, it's just as simple as recognizing what you cannot control and thinking, we all hate things outside of our control that are negatively affecting our lives. We all hate that. But
Mhm.
especially when I hate to keep bringing it up, but especially when I got diagnosed with cancer, there's nothing I can do about that. Like the only thing,
Yeah.
and it was basically like I I just told myself every day, I'm gonna do everything I can do if that means having this treatment, having this surgery, having this, having that, which all scared me. It was like, okay, but what's the other option? There isn't one.
Mm.
So then it became more of like, I can't control that I have cancer, but I can control what I do about it.
Wow.
I kind of started having that mentality of like, okay, I can't control X, but what I can control is Y. There's always something that you within your control that you can change. I can't change that it's raining outside, but I can change whether or not I listen to sad songs and cry all day, or if I like, play a scary video game. Just something like that, which to me is production. That is I
So
know.
Channing-esque right there.
Uh, so it's just, recognizing what you can't control, but then finding something that you can. There's been people who have come to me and said like, "Oh, I don't, how do I get your confidence? How do you, how do I look good in pictures?" I'm like, it's not. I'm like, I'm not doing anything special. Like, it's just you just have to have the mindset of like, okay, I can't control how other people see me, or I can't control if other people insult me or whatever, but I can control how I feel about myself and what I tell myself. I can't
Mhm.
control what other people are telling
Yes.
me. Like recently I got bullied on Facebook for some random person for no reason apparently just telling me I was fat over and over. I just kind of was like, okay. So I can't control what he does, but I can control whether or not I tell myself those same insults, or if I tell myself, no, like, so what if you are? It doesn't make you any less beautiful, it doesn't make you any less worthy, it doesn't make you any less of a person, it doesn't make you any less
Mm.
sexy, it doesn't make you any less cute, it doesn't make me any less of anything. It just is, it's like saying I have green eyes. That's also a true statement. Like I can decide I can decide whether or not I'm going to let that person affect me, or if I'm going to say, no, like, no, someone else might think that about me, but I'm going to think this about myself.
Wow. You are like, you deserve a standing ovation right now. Like, that was so
Oh,
beautiful and powerful. And when you listen back on what you just said, I hope you let that be like a mantra every day that you're feeling down or any hard thing that comes, because holy smokes, that was a beautiful like law that we should live
oh,
by. And in honor, because we are recording this on Women's Day, in honor of us
yes,
women,
woo.
and nothing about us and who we are can ever be diminished in
No.
any way. And you just described that
Oh,
so
thank you.
beautifully.
I'm glad I was able to sound more eloquent than I think I am.
You're very eloquent.
I'm better on the page, I promise.
Yeah, you are a writer. I mean, a very, very creative
Thank
writer
you.
at that. Yeah. I was telling my husband that you write for What Culture, and he's like, "What culture? I know what culture."
Yeah. Woohoo, thanks. Thanks,
He got
husband.
so excited. Oh my lord. I wanted to ask you some questions because I want to talk about the taboo nature of mental health diagnoses
Sure.
and the taboo nature of dissociative identity disorder. So you started out talking about how this is very rare. And I think it's rare to the degree that it's rarely diagnosed.
Correct. Yes.
And perhaps parts of the world or communities who may have been put in a place in their lives to need to develop ability to disassociate to survive, perhaps they are not always the people who have access to somebody who's going to
Yeah.
diagnose them. And I think that just by nature of how this mental health experience comes to be, that it could be very hard to get a true and accurate understanding or awareness of how prevalent it is. In addition to that, I think that people are oftentimes discouraged due to the taboo nature of DID or multiple personality disorder, split personalities, like all of
Mhm.
these terms that can be used to describe this. I feel like the taboo nature can discourage someone from ever speaking about it or seeking help. And they might also fear what that could mean given how media portrays this type of mental health experience. And so I'm curious to hear from you. And you can take this down a whole different faucet too. Like I've worked with people who go through, so I come from a history of working with
Mhm.
children with mental health diagnoses, and there was a large sector of the children I served that were in the state's custody or had experienced some extreme trauma, sometimes prolonged trauma. And disassociating was a survival
Of course.
technique. It wasn't to a place that we would say that there's any personality kind of diagnoses
Mhm.
per se, but it was aware that disassociating was a survival mechanism. I've worked with families to the point where when they discover this or learn this, they've gone through routes of doing
Oh,
exorcisms
wow.
and this whole different kind of philosophy of this being the
Yeah.
devil.
Oof.
And I'm so curious with learning from you. Part of your mission in this world is to dispel the taboo nature of mental
Yes.
health, any mental health
Right.
diagnoses. And so I want to speak about that with you for a minute and kind of get your
Yeah,
perspective.
absolutely. I think that part of the reason why it's easier for me to be so open about this is because I've realized that, in sharing my past traumas about, I won't go off on tangents, but like of, going through a
Mhm,
conversion camp and surviving that
mhm.
experience and then not wanting to talk about it and then talking about it with others and seeing how it helps other people, along with the same thing with my sexual assault. I didn't want to talk about it. There were so many people who, my boss, the first words out of her mouth when I told her I was sexually assaulted were, "Why would he target you? You're such a big girl."
Oh my gosh.
And
Whoa.
it was like, yeah, if that didn't make me wanna shut up about it. So, but then I
Whoa.
realized the more that I spoke about it and the more women I was helping or the more people I was helping come forward with their own experiences of sexual assault, it made me want to be open and want to speak about these things that
Mm.
people think, "Oh, this doesn't happen," or, "Oh, if it really happened this often, then people would be talking about it," or whatever. Part of my
Mm.
reason about being so open about my diagnosis with DID, despite the stigma, is I feel like if people do wanna make assumptions about me based off of negative portrayals in the media or what they think they believe in, what they think they know about DID rather, is that's kind of on them. And I would much, much rather help a stranger with coming to terms with their own mental illness and knowing that they're not alone and having a brain that works like this and making people feel more comfortable and dispelling the stigmas and losing people in my life that call themselves my friends but clearly aren't if they don't support me in having this diagnosis or
Mhm.
having any diagnosis. I very
Mhm.
quickly have come to realize who my real friends are and in the way that they behave based off of how they deal with my
Yes.
trauma, which seems weird, but it's become very eye opening. And the people that have stayed in my life for so long are there for a reason. It's because those are the people that really love and care about me. And those are the people that ultimately are the ones who matter. So, as scary as it is to kind of come forward and have people make assumptions about you, I believe that the benefits outweigh the costs tremendously in that sense.
Mm. Yeah, and this diagnosis is not, it's not a death sentence. It's not a doom, like you're doomed
No.
type of experience whatsoever. It literally and truly means that your brain has developed to the degree to overcome something horrific, something that was too painful or difficult for you to consciously live through. And as a side effect of your brain developing that ability to do that, you have now that capacity to disassociate. And with that comes learning how to navigate what you can't control with it.
Absolutely. It's a journey for sure in learning, taking those first steps and first acknowledging it to yourself. Is such a huge one. Just saying, okay, like I know this is rare, I know it's heavily debated, but this is what I've been told. This is, the diagnosis that I've been given, and I have to come to terms with that. And
Mm.
I think that once you kind of accept it for yourself and recognize that that doesn't make you a bad person and that we're not all serial killers, like
Yeah.
the media is often portrayed every single, like, if you think of any portrayal of anyone with multiple personalities, they're not the hero or the protagonist. They're always the villain.
Mhm.
So it's really easy for us to think that about ourselves when it's been portrayed that way. So
Yeah, it's easy to villainize something you don't
yeah, exactly. And
understand.
so when it's been so heavily villainized and that's all you know about it until someone tells you this is what you have to kind of overcome that villainization of yourself to yourself,
Mm,
because
mm,
otherwise, you don't move forward. You just stay
mm.
still and you stay depressed and upset, and you don't feel like you're worth working on yourself. It's really important to.
In part, it sounds like part of your healing journey has really been to develop a strong mindset and to, what's the right word? Refine your support system to be who truly is supportive of you and what you
Oh
truly
yeah,
need.
100%. And even, sometimes that support system also has to come internally. I think that's like something
Mm,
that's so often overlooked and not really spoken about as much. Is part of the struggle with having any mental illness is recognizing within yourself, regardless of trauma, regardless of any negative experience that you may have gone through, assaults, abuse, etc., any of that makes people feel worthless or ashamed or negatively about themselves. So the first step, I think, in healing is realizing that you're worth saving, you're worth working on,
mm,
you're worth taking the time to work on yourself and take time for yourself and to listen to yourself and listen to your body and your mind and what it needs, and being okay with it, taking care of yourself and not feeling like you're a burden and not feeling like you're less than because you have an illness or
mm,
some sort of mental health issue. It doesn't mean you're unworthy. It just means that you need a little extra help.
mhm.
That's fine. Everybody needs extra help from time to time. Everyone. Strongest people in the
Yes,
world will say that they could not have gotten where they were without help.
absolutely.
No matter who your heroes are or your idols or whoever you admire, look up to, as much as a self-made person as they are or make themselves out to be, there's one or two people that helped and supported them along the way. And
Mhm,
that person, more often than not, also has to be yourself. You have to count you as one of your supporters. You have to be your biggest fan.
mhm. Absolutely. Thank you for
Oh, of
sharing
course.
that. I think that we can easily forget about ourselves and our worth in this journey. And the reality is, diagnoses or no diagnoses, none of that defines
Ab-
who we are. And none of that defines our strength or what we're capable of, what our worth is, where we fit in society, within our families, within our own hearts. It's just a label. And labels we can choose to listen to or not. And I think what's important to kind of share here, because I think even just the word diagnoses has a taboo, like is
Yeah.
taboo, right? Like there's this connection of like, ooh, like I don't want to have any diagnoses. Diagnoses are only developed for people to understand your symptomology and find ways to help.
Right. Right.
And that's the mere purpose of it. It's not to, sadly it's become, and this was a side effect of the development of the DSM, the diagnostic statistical manual when it was created. But sadly, diagnoses have become labels that feel like they're like stamped on our foreheads that we walk around with, that we have to deal with or live with, rather than merely a classification of symptoms that we
Right.
have.
Yeah.
And I sure hope that people listening to this hear you, Channing, and hear how you have not let this define you or limit you in any way. Yet you've allowed this to create an understanding of how your mind works and how you can strengthen your sense of control over your life and your sense of happiness,
Absolutely.
right? And outside of that, that's it, right? And you're using it as a platform to help others to realize
Oh,
the same
absolutely. I
things.
mean, I always want people to know that they aren't alone and they don't have to suffer alone. I've lost way too many friends to suicide and known a lot of LGBTQ youth that have lost to suicide and things like that that
Mhm.
I just don't ever want people to have that feeling. And even
Mm.
like I mentioned earlier, even if it was just if it's a stranger I don't know, I'd rather help them and lose a couple fair weather friends than not help someone. So if something positive can come out of
Yeah.
this for anybody, even if, that something positive is for someone else, then I like to try to turn whatever is negatively affecting me into a positive. And if talking about
Mm.
it and being more open with it helps people, I am all about it.
It is truly admirable. I so appreciate that
Oh,
about you. So Channing, if anybody that's listening to this wants to learn more about you, follow you, be inspired by you, or be connected to you in a way to understand their own journey and that they can relate to what you've shared today, how can they find you?
well, I do have Twitter at Miss Valentine did, and I am also starting a YouTube channel about DID. The introduction of it, the evolution of it, how it manifests itself for me, how I personally cope. There's the first video is going to be coming out in the middle of April, so in about a month from now, it'll be at Miss Valentine did at YouTube. So you can, or Miss Valentine DID if that helps.
Perfect. And do you have anything else you would want to share with folks today or to kind of promote your brilliant writing in any way?
um, I love promoting my writing. No, I really don't. I'm awful at self promotion. But uh, what I will say is, if I leave anything with anyone, it's if you haven't watched the X Files yet, highly recommend, but stop watching after season 7. All right. That's what I would like the world to know. Haven't seen it, best TV show of all
Oh,
time. Guaranteed.
one of my memories of you is back in high school. I don't know if I was in the choir room or what, but I feel like it was you and Lauren talking about X Files. And it was like, I had no idea what you guys were talking about because I'm a do not watch anything that gets my imagination going to a degree of
Right.
fear. But I love that however many years it's been since then that you are still in that place of
Yeah, no,
X Files.
it's never gone away. I've loved that show since I was 4. I
Oh
mean,
my
like it
gosh.
started when I was 4 years old in 1993 and it's 2021 and now I've met the main actors more than once.
You're
It's
so
I
cool.
mean, if I wish I could go back in time and tell my younger self, like, "It's okay. You'll get through everything because one day you're gonna meet Dave Duchovny and Gillian Anderson, and everything will be fine." Yeah,
Gonna
I
make your
promise
life.
you it's totally worth the pain you're about to suffer. Poor young self.
Oh,
Yeah, some
love
things never
that. I
changed,
love
you
that.
know?
Well, Channing, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with all of us. I hope that we can have you back on here once again in the future, especially once your YouTube channel is
Yeah,
developed
absolutely.
and continue the sharing and the learning together.
Oh, yeah, I would love that.
Perfect. Thank you, Channing.
Of course.
Thank you so, so much for tuning in today. I hope you are feeling inspired and empowered in your own healing journey. I know that many of you listening might be reflecting on your own stories that you may feel called to share. If so, please reach out to me at dinat@empowertoheal.com. That's DENAT@empower2heal.com. Or drop me a message through my Instagram handle at empower2heal. I would love to connect with you and learn about your journeys so that we can hopefully continue to spread these powerful life lessons on empowering ourselves to heal. My contacts will also be linked in the show notes below so that you can easily find me. We are so eager to start a movement in showcasing the many ways we can heal. And you can be part of this movement too by capturing images and tagging them #empower2heal on Instagram. We look forward to seeing all the ways that you are empowered to heal. I love you, beautiful souls, and thank you so much. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and review.